Welcome to our afternoon programming. Hope you're enjoying your time here. We have Meg Layton coming up next, right here, and she's going to be talking about building your network before you need your network. And Meg is also one of our organizers for this event, so
don't need her for the next hour.
yes, that's right. Any volunteer questions, you'll have to ask somebody else. Anyway.
So don't need me for the next hour because I'm going to be up here. Okay. So for those of you who don't know me, I am Dr. Meg Layton. I've been in technology for a very long time. I have a much longer intro, but since I don't want to spoil my talk, you'll all just have to wait to hear it when we get to that part, if that works. We're going to do things a little backward as a result, and I'm just going to start talking and you're going to believe I have something valuable to say. Okay, this is going to be an interactive session and you are going to need to take notes. So my lovely assistant here is going to bring notepads and pencils for anybody who is ill-equipped to take notes at this time in their app, because I want you to walk away with referenceable things that you won't forget as soon as you walk outside this room. Okay, so for those of you online who may be joining us virtually, I apologize. I cannot give you a notebook and a pencil, but I hope you have scratch paper by you. Okay, be aware that throughout the presentation, you're going to see a little green bar right along the bottom of the screen. That is going to be your 60 seconds to think about what you need to know and what you want to take away and the things that I'm giving you to think about so that you can refer back to them at some later time. Okay, so watch for that. And I'm going to be quiet for 60 seconds and give you an opportunity to do that. Hopefully at the end of this, you'll walk away with something that gives you an opportunity to figure out how to use the tools you already have available to build your network a little bit farther than where you currently are. Okay, everybody ready for that? Everybody can hear me? Yes? Okay. That is not a complaint I get often, so there you go, okay? Whenever I do a talk, I like to give a little bit of insight into the inspiration, and this one comes from a couple of places. I was at a conference not so long ago, and somebody said to me, do you sometimes feel like everybody else has this secret decoder ring of how to make their network work for them? And how do I tap into that? Because I don't really know. And that's a really big thing, because the trick to building a network is to nurture and build your network before you need it. And how do you do that? So being in tech as long as I have, I will tell you that I've seen some things, right? And there's peaks and valleys in sort of our hiring structure and what happens, and people come to jobs and they're plentiful and then suddenly they're not so plentiful, and that happens, and that's okay. And when a change in technology hiring patterns happens, it seems to surprise people. And that's when they start to reach out and say, hey, now I need my network, but they've forgotten to build their network before then. So if you're reaching out at that time, it's a little too late for people to get to know you and match you with an opportunity that really works for you. I've done some learning about biologically adaptive network design. I work in tech. I built some things. So the concept of building and designing networks is very, very natural, but the work being done in biologically inspired network design kind of blew me away. So you're going to give me 2 slides to kind of explain to you what that even is, in case that's a new term for you. And I'll just show you some pictures and you'll be like, oh, and then you'll understand how we as humans are perhaps need to follow the same interconnections. All right, so there's a couple things that humans want from a network. Any network. It doesn't matter if it's a communications network or a transportation network. They sort of all want the same thing. We want it to be efficient. We want it to be resilient. We want to make smart budgetary choices. So here's the thing, is that evolution has things that have refined building networks over generations. Like vascular system, been there for years. We should maybe take a tip or two from that, because they do a really good job of getting things from one place to another, right? And then there's this thing called slime mold. I don't know if you've heard of it, but slime mold has been shaped by hundreds of millions of years. It has no brain. And yet in the hundreds of millions of years of evolution, they are far more experienced at solving certain architectural network problems than any humans are. So we should take some lessons from them as a result. All right, so Here's some slime mold studies because I am a geek at heart and I started going down that rabbit hole, and now I'm going to share pictures with you. In its vegetative phase, the slime mold slimes its way through the world seeking food. And as it explores, it links previously found food sources with its tubular structures, which it builds as it goes. So transport networks, which are sort of ubiquitous in both social and biological systems, learn a lot from slime mold studies. And so in 2010, in Tokyo, they did this slime mold study. So if you look, this is actually a map sort of outside Tokyo. And they've thrown oat flakes in a pattern of Japanese cities around Tokyo. And the slime mold constructed networks with nutrient channeling tubes to connect those oat flakes. And what they ended up with down on the bottom right-hand side is something that looks remarkably like the railway system inside Tokyo. Turns out we did the right thing and we built the right network. And now here we are with the most efficient way to get things from A to B. This is a map of Toronto. And in Toronto, it shows 17 of the railway subway stations with a network that was created by slime mold computer simulations. Now, I am in no way suggesting that you throw a bunch of oat flakes on the ground and that's the best way to build your network. So don't anybody get that idea, because that's not what I'm telling you, all right? What I'm saying is there are common things that connect entities, and knowing how to tap into those common things ahead of when you need to do it is the key to building your network a little organically. I'm following these studies and making sure that you're taking advantage of new routes within your network. So that, of course, brings the next question in. What is the common thread for humans? So humans are organic. We like to build our networks on something a little more than oat flakes. I don't know, maybe you like oat flakes. I'm not a big fan, but so if we take the lessons from the biologically inspired adaptive network design, one can posit that for a network to be strong, it should grow organically, not be forced by life events. Networks for mold adapt and grow organically because of oat flakes and finding their food. Networks for people are built and grow organically by shared life experiences. In order to build the network on your shared life experience, you need to identify the tools you have now and what you can do to make those stronger. So this is where we're going to start the work. And the first step is to identify you. This is where you think about what makes you you and what parts of you you are willing to share with others, that you are willing to do so in the drop of the hat. And when you do, it makes you feel safe. It can also help identify shared life experiences in others. And in this way, you organically start to connect to others. So you want to think about your identities. You want to think about what makes you you. And I'm not saying your work identity. I'm talking about you. Okay? Has everybody got that so far? So I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Here's your first 60 seconds. I want you to think through your identities and write down 3 to 5 that make you safe and you would be willing to share with others at the drop of a hat. Is my bar coming? It is. Look, see how that works? There's a little timer and the little green bar is moving along the bottom of the screen. And when it's done, your 60 seconds will be up. I don't know if the people online can see it, but trust me, there's a green bar. What's that? So there is music at some of the later green bars. I have no idea whether it will actually work. So we're going to give it a shot. Okay. I didn't want to alarm people with the first bar. Hey, my sound worked. Okay, woohoo. All right, so everybody sort of got some thoughts at least. Like it doesn't have to be fully formed thoughts, but they do have to be thoughts, okay? All right, so if I did this for me, here's what you need to know about me. I'm a mom. I'm a dog lover. I'm a complete theater geek. I read a lot. I'm a huge Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan. And yes, I slide that reference into every talk I ever give. So there you go. And I entered tech in the early 90s. So everything else you pretty much discover as I go along and I talk to you. But these are things that I would say about me. And now all the moms in the world are going, oh, I'm a mom too. And all the dog lovers are like, hey, I'm a dog lover too. And those are things we would be able to connect with. See how that works? Now we have a shared connection, right? So now the trick is you want to sort of just think a little bit outside you and think about where you connect with others. So this may change your definition of your identities. What is part of your sphere of influence? When you are evaluating your community, the best place to start is to kind of look around. Where do you spend your time? Who do you spend it with? InfoSec is a giant ocean of interests and people. That's not so much a community as it is an ecosystem. And that means you have to find your place in the ecosystem and you have to build your little tubular transport to connect your pieces together. So what have you found useful? What are your shared interests? What do you wish you knew more about? What do you enjoy most? And it doesn't necessarily need to be InfoSec related. I will tell you that this little graphic down on the corner is sort of my journey into the team I used to work with in CTF. So when I was a new mom, which mind you, both my kids are over 18 now, so this was a while ago, there was a Facebook group, it was called Geek Moms, and we shared things like Comic-Con meetups and things like that. What movie was coming out that we were most interested in? And I found this little subsection of that group that was mostly interested in InfoSec. And that subsection of that group then built themselves a little CTF team that we would work on CTFs mostly between 3 and 5 in the morning, because that's when we were all up and available. And, you know, okay, so that's a limited application, but that's how you connect your interests together and build your network. Because when I was up at 3 in the morning and was like online going, hey, is anybody around and what are you doing? They're like, yes, as a matter of fact, we're playing CTF and don't you want to join our team? And now I have a shared connection. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. So now you need to think through your community and you get another 60 seconds to do that. See, my little green bar is coming on the screen. I'm really, how is nobody impressed that I figured out how to do that on my PowerPoint slide? Come on. Thank you. I am not a PowerPoint slide manipulator, so I was pleased with myself at work. I am not, I am Excel certified. See, there's my applause for getting the bar all the way across. Aren't you impressed? Okay. I don't know if people online can hear that, but trust me, it was cool. All right. So everybody's got some thoughts about where you might be okay with sharing your identities in your groups. Okay. So this is sort of what it looks like to me and some of the stories I have to tell about how this works. So if anybody goes through the vast array of certifications after my name, you'll assume I'm a SANS geek, and most people at SANS sort of know that about me. And there was not, it was pretty long ago now that I think about, a long time ago, SCOTUS called me and he's like, hey, you need to sort of connect with Tara Wheeler. She's writing this book. It seems like a good thing. You sort of need to know something about it. And sure enough, Tara put out this Women in Tech book, and I did reach out to her because I was like, hey, this sounds like something I'm really interested in. I'd like to know a little bit more about the stories and the people you have writing. We started a conversation. And since that time, Tara and I have been colleagues and coworkers. We have put a number of things together. You will find my name in her book. And most recently, she was the mentor for my daughter's Girl Scout Gold Award project. So that's how you connect your communities sort of in unexpected ways, if that makes sense, right? Like, yes, we made a technical connection, but we made it because I knew this other guy and he called me and he said, hey, this is interesting, right? This is sort of my second story. Did that pop up there? It didn't pop up there, did it? Okay. Which is when my kids were starting high school, it was a brand new high school. It didn't exist before my son was a freshman. But what did exist was a scout troop. So a bunch of us were standing around talking about, hey, your son's going to Colgan next year. What do you think about Colgan? And how do we get started in a club? And does anybody know? Because our kids aren't really joiners and they're already in scouts. And what can we do? And so we started talking about Cyber Patriot, which I was already mentoring through the Cyber Jitsu Girls Academy. So I knew a little something about Cyber Patriot. And they were like, oh, how do I get my kid in that? Hey, the principal is my next door neighbor. So maybe I could just talk to him and we could start a Cyber Patriot Club. And so we did. And so now it's in its like 9th year. So, you know, that's again, random conversation, shared connection. And here we are. Does that make sense to everybody? But it takes some thought to think about how that can happen. So you're prepared to hold those conversations, right? So consider this, consider shared expense, how you would be able to identify shared experiences. When I was a kid, every adult could tell you where they were when Kennedy was shot. Every single adult, right? There are some of us that you could come up to and we would all be able to tell you where we were at 9/11 when the planes hit the buildings. That's just because of who we are. And now everybody in the industry has a story about 2020. That is a shared experience that the entire world has shared with you, right? So, you know, no matter whether that was a positive experience or you have a positive experience, think about what that means, that throughout the entire world, we have a shared experience we could actually start a conversation about. Okay, that doesn't happen a lot, but that's just, you just happen to be in that situation, right? So I could introduce myself as, hi, I'm Dr. Meg Layton. I'm Director of Security Architecture and Engineering. Now, that works. That's definitely who I am, but it doesn't give you anything to connect to me about unless you are also a Director of Security Architecture and Engineering. Like, it doesn't mean anything to you, okay? So if I can draw you a picture of my opportunities and I can establish shared connection. So I'm gonna, if I say I work for XYZ company and you also work for XYZ company, now we have a shared connection. If I say I work for Kroger's and you're like, hey, I shop at Kroger's, that's still a shared connection. You still know something and we could hold a conversation about that. And so you want to sort of work through that. If I say I'm a cat person, which clearly I've already told you I'm a dog person, so that's not me, but you say, hey, me too, then that's still a shared connection, right? So here's my experiment and why I was, if anybody follows me on Twitter, why I was obsessing about Kevin Bacon last night is because I'm going to give you an introduction that can establish a shared connection with the majority of folks in the room. I'm going to do kind of a 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my introduction in 6 statements, and we're going to see if I can build a shared connection with everybody in this room. In order to do that, I need you all to raise your hands. And when I say something that connects to you and you're like, hey, I'd be able to hold a conversation around that, I want you to lower your hand. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody good with that? All right, raise your hand. Okay, statement 1. My name is Dr. Meg Layton. I am Director of Security Architecture and Engineering at Children's National Hospital in Washington, D.C. Statement 2. I live in Virginia with my family and dog, although I grew up in New England. Statement 3. I grew up in a large family. I'm number 4 in a line of 5 girls, daughter of a public school science teacher. I'm on number 4. I've been in tech since the early 90s and security since 2000, although my original degree was a liberal arts degree. So if you do that math in your head, my formative music and fashion years were the 80s. So you're going to have to judge me as you will, as that comes about in the talk. I'm on number 5. I volunteer for a lot of things, but I am most passionate about next-gen InfoSec and lifelong learning. How'd I do? Did I get everybody? Okay. Do you see how that happened? Now, all of you are like, hey, there is something I could hold a conversation with that woman about, right? Okay, so now it's your turn. I don't expect it to be perfect, but I do want you to think about where you can establish a shared connection or two with people besides you. So this is going to be your opportunity to write down your "this is me" introduction, okay? Doesn't have to be complete. I'm not going to ask you to share it with anybody, but I want you to think about that exercise I just went through and what are your 5 or 6 statements that you're like, hey, I could probably connect to people if I had to say this. So I don't know if people also, my 60 seconds are now playing "this is me" because that's what I do. Yes, apparently. No. I promised my children I wouldn't sing, but it's hard. All right, so your time's up. Everybody got some thoughts? You've jotted down something. Yes? Yes? Okay. All right, so here's why this matters. The right introduction gives you power. It gives you power in a conversation with everybody you meet. You get to decide what you want others to talk to you about. And using that in your introduction gives them permission to speak to you about it. So if you would like to speak to them about it and you say to me, hey, I work at Children's National Hospital, people are now have permission to speak to me about Children's National Hospital. And that gives you the power in the conversation because they're not floundering around trying to figure out what to talk to you about. So that's why thinking through it ahead of time and practicing it can be empowering. Realize this changes for you over time. So it is absolutely okay to do this exercise every year, every 6 months, however often your life changes, so that you have new things to share with people and to give them permission to speak to you about. You don't only use this exercise when you introduce yourself. Think about how many times you've been in meetings or new gatherings and they have an icebreaker. How many times do we hate those icebreakers, right? Like they're awful. They're god awful. You don't know what to say about them. You have no idea what to tell you. I will admit it took me an embarrassing long amount of time to figure out what the point of those even were. Okay. But once I figured it out, it was super important. I used to think it was like high school. I had to think of something that people would think was cool or quirky or something, but that's actually not the point. Okay. The point is, you're trying to build a shared connection with somebody. You want it to be something that they can connect to you and hold a conversation about that's not work related. Okay, so that gets hard. I clearly remember when this occurred to me, why this was important that I know this. I was sitting in a room and the icebreaker question was, tell me about a time you met somebody famous. Now I'm kind of old, so I've met a lot of famous people. But a lot of the famous people that I've met, young people don't know anything about. There are people, we went around that room, they were talking about sports people. I had no idea what they were talking about. I am not a huge sports fan. To make it worse, they were international crowds. So like, I really didn't know those sports teams. I had no idea what they were talking about, right? So that left me in a bit of a quandary because I'm sitting there and I'm like, how do I pick somebody that people would relate to? Now, it was about 10 years ago. So I'm just going to tell you it was about 10 years ago, because then if you're really young and have no idea who I'm about to say, then I won't feel so young, bad. So I picked Katharine Hepburn. Now, mind you, it was right before Katharine Hepburn died. And for those of you that don't know, Katharine Hepburn is a fairly famous movie actress. And I was in Connecticut at the time, and she also lives in Connecticut. So there was a little bit more context around that. But that gave me an opportunity to do a shared connection with people. But you see how that icebreaker question itself like stumped me, right? And until that moment, it hadn't occurred to me that the point really is to say something that makes other people connect to you as a person, okay? Finally, here's the other reason this is really, really important. Introductions done wrong can be bad, like really bad. So I'm gonna encourage y'all, don't be this guy. So I was at a conference earlier this year, and in the Slack conversation, this is what came up. He said, I'm trying to break in. I've gotten a couple of certifications during COVID. I was going to work from some conferences. They were canceled, and I'm super frustrated. Now, I feel for the guy's frustration, but what about this can I actually connect to? Unless you've been in that exact same position, it's hard. So how would you make that better? Say which field he's transitioning in from. Good. What else? What are some of the certifications, or hey, even the certifying body? Because while I may not have his certification, if you had said, I've got some SAN certifications, you know what? I can hold a conversation about that at the drop of a hat. Right? Like there are things that would have made this better. There are things that can make it worse. And what can make it worse is if the next thing you post is this. Now what do I know about him? Thank you. That is exactly what my thought was. Because A, you're at a conference and you're posting things up in a Slack channel, and maybe not everybody has an opportunity to talk to you at that precise second. Like this literally came up 20 minutes after he posted the first thing. Like what? But now what else has happened? Does somebody at her table know what that means? Okay. So, oh, well, let's go back a little bit. So, hold on. It really makes, but what else has happened? Because he's in the Slack channel with his name, and now what do I know?
This person probably doesn't have a very good day. Volunteer opportunity.
Right. Am I not thinking twice about offering that volunteer opportunity or even talking to him about a job? Because suddenly I'm like, you know what? Maybe you're not my priority right now. It is absolutely your bedside manner. So that's why I encourage you all, write it down and practice it. Practice it in front of a mirror. Practice it with your best friend. I don't care how you practice it, but for heaven's sake, talk to somebody and be like, hey, I'm working on my introduction of myself. Can you make sure that this is something that I'd be willing to put out there? Because even if you put it out remote and you're typing it in a channel, like people can still connect to you or not connect to you. Right. Am I moving forward here? Okay. Now I'm still going backwards. How do I move forward? Hold on. Where am I pointing this? Give me a sec. We're moving forward, right? All right. Okay, so now we're going to build on this a little bit, and we're going to build on this with a referenceable body of work. Okay, so here's where you identify your shared experiences that make things a referenceable body of work. You figure out how to use that to your advantage. So this is an example, like conferences and trainings and certifications, books you have read, talks you have been to, instructions you have followed. So what makes it referenceable? Well, we're in the world of virtual things and we can track almost everything online. So If there's a record of it online, it makes it referenceable. LinkedIn now has these little badges that'll pop up, like all sorts of things will happen if you put things online. But you can also reference things in your social media. You can be like, I'm at this amazing conference today, and you use the appropriate hashtag and you put it in your social media, and everybody else at that same conference can connect to you now. That's amazing, right? You can also think about any interaction that makes your shared experience. All right, so like this is a great example, right? My friend, he just tells you right here, he's like, if people take the time to speak to you in a conference, respond to them, call them out, so that the next time they meet up with you, you can be like, hey, I heard you speak. And they'd be like, oh, yes, you did. Look at that. That was nice of you, right? That's a huge deal for a lot of speakers. You can publish a blog. When you check in your code on GitHub, that makes it referenceable. Any sort of things like that in the world of social media, your referenceable body of work becomes more ubiquitous, and it becomes what is known as your portfolio in the old school world. Okay, so you want to think about that and think that through. So now here we are. What is your referenceable body of work that says I got to be me? Write that down.
That's no reason to say goodbye. And if you're fast enough for a girl, I'm gonna go march to the beat. March to the beat, gonna do my thing. March to the beat.
Different, right?
March to the beat, gonna do my thing. Feel this beat, cause I gotta be me.
Tell my kids help me put this together. Yes, but you want to make them referenceable. So where would you list it? Like in your LinkedIn profile, do you have those listed there? In your resume, do you have those listed there? Those sort of things. Like I literally did resume reviews where people did exactly that, where they said, hey, I have certifications. I had no idea who the referenceable body was. Yeah. Well, they said what the name of the cert was, but if you weren't, it didn't say like Sans Diac, it just said, you know, firewall, whatever. Like it was pretty pitiful. Yeah, something like that. All right. So here is why this is important, because your LinkedIn and your resume can't do its job if you don't know where your work is referenceable. Okay. So your times have changed a little bit from when I had a resume. Okay. Your resume now essentially has two jobs. The first job, I think most people sort of know about, which is, and it's important to remember your resume has two jobs. The first job it has is to make it through the keyword search of whatever scanner is pulling in and seeing if you're a match for the job. That is not a human function happening. Like that's the reality of it. You are submitting it online and it's like, oh, firewall, OS, okay, here, off you go, right? So you want those words in your resume, okay? That's absolutely something you want, okay? But the second job it has is when the resume lands on my desk, it is to make you interesting enough that I want to talk to you. And that means, guess what it's supposed to do? Build a shared life experience with me. So if you have not listed your certifying body and you do not tell me that to Sans Cert, I won't know to talk to you about that. If you do not put your alma mater on there and I went to the same school, I won't know to talk to you about that. Like those are big things there. If you do not put that you have been to this conference, I won't know to talk to you about that. Figure out how we build those life connection. I'm not necessarily saying put it on your resume, but put it on your LinkedIn if nothing else, so that I know that. Okay, it is super important. As you go through your artifacts, it's really easy on LinkedIn. It's not impossible on your resume, but it does require thought on your resume to be able to put those things in. Okay, the important thing on your resume is you make sure you are identifying what you can, because you have a very brief amount of time with the human it lands in front of for them to decide, are you somebody I want to talk to? Okay. And that is super important that you do your best to build that shared connection with them. All right. So now we're on our fifth kind of exercise where you think through your artifacts. If it's easier to bring up your profile or resume on your phone, go ahead and do that. And think about whether they do the job or do they put you on the edge of great and you still need a little bit of a nudge. Okay. Look at your headline on LinkedIn or your social media of choice. Does it reflect 3 things about which you maybe can connect people? Review your experience section. Does it connect with volunteer roles, speaker roles, or roles outside of your employment history? Review your certifications, licenses, and education. Does it reflect organizations that you would be able to use to identify shared experiences with people? You get 60 seconds, and usually that exercise takes a little bit longer. This is what mine looks like. And you can see if you're on LinkedIn and you're looking at me that while I do have my work experience, I also have Women's Society of Cyber Jitsu. I also have the Diana Initiative. I probably have other things up there too. So you get 60 seconds. Stepping stones take us where we want to go. It's never straight. Sometimes you gotta leave. There's no someone else to get it all out until we find. We're just watching away from what we're meant to be. Pretty sure this is also Disney. All right, so now you're going to put it a little bit into practice and you're going to figure out how do you identify shared life experiences in others. Okay. What tools you have right now to help and how do you build your profile so you can identify others? And your job today is connect to at least 3 people. So there, see? Somebody here has stickers if you show her that you can do that. Okay. So first things first is, fortunately, we're in InfoSec. So there's one common way to sort of, everybody loves, right? Stickers. Walk around, here's a sticker on the laptop, and you're like, hey, I have that same sticker. Like everybody does that, right? Like stickers is a great way. Challenge coins, t-shirts. You're clearly remember standing in line at scout camp. A lot of my stories sort of start that way, but the guy in front of me had a semantic bag. And since I, worked there for 20 years, I was like, hey, where'd you get that bag? And we had a conversation, and now we're of course LinkedIn buddies, and we hold conversations all the time about scout camp because that's the way we are. Right? So that's the good way of doing it. Badge lanyards. You might walk into an office and it might look like this. Certainly my office sort of looks like this, but you know what it gives you an opportunity to do? Pick out a conference you went to and we could start a conversation about it. Right? Like that's why we give them to you, because now you know things, right? But here's the thing. The old-fashioned way a lot of us used to do it was this way. Okay, for those of you joining us from home, these are things called Rolodexes, right? But when I first got into the industry, what I would do was when I got my business card, I would write on the back of it where I met that person and what I was even doing with their business card in the first place, because then I could connect to them forever. So, you know what? You have to think about that when you're doing your online communication. I mean, not for nothing, but there are a lot of people who reach out to connect to me on LinkedIn or on, like, please think about your last exercise, which tells you where do we go from here. I want you to take the next 60 seconds or longer if you need before the end of the conference, find your 3 people, and it can be something really simple. It can be something really simple. It can be this. You know, hey, I saw you at Cyber JitsuCon in 2023. Hey, me too. My favorite talk was hope we can connect, whatever it is. Find 3 people, make a connection. Do tell them how you managed to make that connection so that they have easily identified shared life experience. And that's sort of where you go from here.
Where do we go from here?
And yes, this is your obligatory Buffy the Vampire Slayer musical music.
Where do we go from here?
Battle's done and we kind of won. So we said,
If you're in the Whova app, this is really easy to do to connect to 3 people.
where do we go from here?
Why is the path on the page?
If you're online, and I've got somebody watching the online chat for this in Whova, so don't forget to ask questions if you've got some. Because I promise you, I'm almost done talking.
Walk alone in fear.
Tell me,
Where do we go from here? See us on the hill.
All right, so the end's about to appear right here, actually. So this is where you can find me. Most people know I'm on Twitter, VA Megabyte. I had a little name tag made to go to a conference, and then promptly COVID happened, and then I couldn't wear it to conferences for like 2 years, and it was really, really frustrating, but I dug it out this year, and now you should all be pleased I'm wearing it. This is my LinkedIn profile. You can find me in the Whova app. I'm pretty sure I'm in there under Dr. Meg Layton, and you can find me in these books. So, you know, if you get bored and you want to read things, there's books. I have some books down in the villages I'm happy to give you if you're dying to read more about anything on that list of subjects. So that was sort of the end of my talk. So if there's questions in the app, hopefully somebody will tell me there's questions online, or I'm happy to take questions from people in the room. Yes, ma'am.
I come back from developer programming.
Okay.
My current job is in programming, and it reflects on my LinkedIn because of my nervousness to change my LinkedIn. Because
Sure.
I don't want my current employer to kind of see that, hey, I'm looking to pivot type of thing.
Sure.
Yes, I am gonna go to the
Resume review.
when that is cybersecurity slanted, but I know at some point I'm gonna have to do the transition of my LinkedIn. It's just, I don't wanna raise any red flags.
Sure. So for those of you I'm going to repeat, just for those of the people online who might not, I don't know if they can hear the people in the room, so I'm going to give it a shot. What about a situation where you're looking to pivot and your role on your LinkedIn resume is your current role, and you maybe don't want to raise red flags to your employer that you're looking to pivot? So how do you change that? In particular, you're talking about a development role. And I will be the first person to tell you that everybody in development is in security, whether or not they know it. As somebody who led development teams at Semantic for a really long time, like I get they don't know they're in security, but they absolutely are. We depend on our developers day in and day out to develop securely in the apps. They just don't know that's what they're supposed to do. So I will tell you that every time you put in your LinkedIn that you've been working on testing or building a framework, like we interpret that as you are working on security. So just make sure you have those roles kind of called out already in your LinkedIn. And then I'm absolutely okay with on your resume, list out the conferences you have attended as a separate bullet, because that gives me a shared life experience, but tells me what you are interested in doing next. Okay, does that make sense? Yes, go ahead. Okay. Okay, so there was a suggestion in the room, again, I'm just repeating because I don't want people online to not have this experience, but there was a suggestion that there is a tag on LinkedIn. It's a LinkedIn feature where you can post you're open to work, but it will hide that from other people at your company. So if you work at Google and you do not want people at Google to know you are open to work, it will actually hide that from other people. So thank you for that. That was good. Shared life experience there, folks. Yes. So that's a good question. So for those online, the question was whether I recommend separating my volunteer experience with my work experience or put it all together. Some of those are old, so it was before LinkedIn allowed you to separate it. So that's probably why it's all still listed there in full disclosure, and I just haven't moved it. I tend to leave them together because that is how people know me. Like if I am interacting with people from Cyber Jitsu, they actually don't care what else I do. And, you know, like I've been doing it for so long, that's how they know me. And so when they go online, they go to look me up as affiliated with that organization. So it really depends on how much time that you are spending with that organization is what I would tell you. Go ahead. Okay. So it's got a very specific question as to whether I put any of my election officer work on my LinkedIn profile. I don't. That is not super intentional. It's only because I started that during the pandemic. And while I don't have it there, a lot of people know I have it because there are several scout badges that require you to speak to government employees. And I'm constantly being interviewed by scouts about being an election officer. So clearly the word is out there and I'm not super shy about it online either. But it was something I started doing in 2020. So. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm doing my best. She's got mics in case you got more. I don't even have a concept of time up here. Like time and space has stopped for me. Okay, so we have time. So we'll take questions. And is somebody looking in the app if there's questions online? Okay.
I hope this works. Oh, hell yeah, it's working. Okay, so thank you so much for all the great information that you've provided. But my curiosity is, how did you figure out the methodologies to put together in order to sort of give us a framework to introduce us to other people? Like the shared experience thing totally makes sense because yeah, I'm annoyed too when someone's like, I want to do the cybersecurities, give me a job now. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yeah. So how did you figure this out? Is it just from experience or are there books that you've read? Like what was
So a little bit of all of the above. That's a great question. But the honest answer is I took over to be a Girl Scout leader right in the middle of the pandemic. And if there's one thing I discovered about high school girls, they're not super willing to introduce themselves and they had no idea how to do it properly. And so I worked really, really hard. So I did a lot of research into how to make them comfortable and how to build upon that so that I could give them the tools to go off to college and be able to speak confidently about where they were in life and what they wanted to do next. Because the reality is when teenagers go off to college, they have to be able to say to somebody and build a shared life experience really quickly because it's all new to them. So that was where I first thought that they were really lucky because they could they were coming out of the pandemic and there was a shared life experience already built for them. And then I started having conversations about Kenny being shot, and I kind of go down that rabbit hole of where these other shared life experiences occur. And the reality is, like, you have to work hard to identify them. But right now, they get to go in and they say, yeah, 2020, that really sucked. That was the first time I did online classes. Or maybe they thought it was great because it was the first time they did online classes. It doesn't really matter because they get to talk to somebody about, hey, in 2020, I got to do X for the first time. And that's okay, but it's a good conversation starter for them.